boy who dreamt beyond the sky in a small town in Tamil Nadu. There was a boy who often stared at the night sky, his eyes reflecting the dim light of the stars above. Sundar Pichai, even as a child, was not like the others around him. While other boys ran across dusty fields playing cricket, he would sit near the window of their modest home, tracing the movement of satellites and airplanes, imagining the worlds they must touch. He did not have much, and yet in his heart, there was a hunger that no scarcity could touch. His father worked as a factory engineer, and his mother, Lakshmi, kept their home with a patience and warmth that seemed almost infinite. Sundar would watch her move from room to room, the weight of the day pressing on her shoulders, yet her smile never faltered. It was in those quiet observations that he learned the first lesson of his life. Greatness is not just in talent, but in the way one carries themselves with kindness and humility, even when life seems heavy. His school was crowded and noisy, with teachers who often seemed too tired to notice the quiet brilliance in a boy who asked more questions than the lessons provided. Sundar loved to ask why, to dig into the machinery of things, to understand how a simple magnet could attract metal, or how a small spark could light up a bulb. Sometimes his curiosity irritated the teachers, and other times it made them pause and wonder if this boy might do something extraordinary. Yet at home his world was smaller, simpler, and safer. His mother would sit with him for hours, guiding him through basic mathematics, explaining the mysteries of numbers in ways that made him see the universe in patterns, in sequences, in connections that most people missed. She never said, "You have to be great," or "You will be famous one day." She simply nurtured his mind, quietly planting seeds of resilience, patience, and respect for the work it takes to reach beyond one's limits. Even as a child, Sundar faced the first taste of real challenge. One day, a competition was announced at his school for a science project. While other students brought model rockets and robots, Sundar had only scraps of metal, a few wires, and old circuit boards that his father had saved from the factory. He worked late into the night, his small hands fumbling with the fragile materials, sparks flying from mistakes. His mother occasionally whispering encouragement from the doorway. He could feel the weight of expectation, not from others, but from himself. This was more than a project. It was a chance to prove that his mind and his patience could conquer limitations. When the day of the presentation arrived, Sundar's model was crude but clever. It didn't impress everyone, and a few children laughed at the awkward movements of his creation. Sundar felt a sting of humiliation, a fire of frustration burning inside him. Yet when he returned home, it was his mother's quiet nod, her gentle words of understanding that reminded him that failure was not the end. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the world does not see your work at first, but the seeds you plant quietly can grow taller than any building." Sundar remembered those words for the rest of his life, though he did not yet understand how prophetic they were. As the years passed, Sundar's hunger grew. He devoured books on science and technology, spending hours in libraries where the smell of old paper and ink became as familiar as the food he ate. He learned about computers, about how they could connect the world in ways humans had never imagined, and he dreamed of touching that world, of creating tools that could help millions of people. But the road was never smooth. Money was tight, and opportunities were scarce. Sometimes he felt invisible, a small boy in a vast country full of loud voices and booming ambition. Yet he never gave up. Every setback became a lesson, every criticism a quiet challenge to himself. He learned to listen, to observe, to absorb lessons from every corner of life, from his father's meticulous work ethic to his mother's unwavering patience. Then came the day that would shift everything. Sundar was chosen to give a speech at a small technology fair in Chennai. It was not a big event, but to him it was a doorway to the world he had always dreamed of. He practiced for weeks, rehearsing every word, every pause, every moment of expression. When he stepped onto the stage, his heart raced, and for a brief second, he felt the weight of all his struggles, all the quiet hours of work, all the unrecognized effort he had poured into his dreams. The audience was polite, but not immediately, captivated, and a sudden thought flashed across his mind. Maybe he was not meant for this. Yet, In that exact moment, a small girl in the front row clapped louder than anyone else, her eyes wide with admiration. Sundar felt a warmth he had never known, a reassurance that even a single recognition could make a lifetime of effort worth it. He continued, and by the end of the presentation, people were talking, quietly at first. Then with a growing buzz, someone saw potential, someone else saw determination. It was not a thunderous applause, but it was enough. That evening, as Sundar walked home under the soft glow of the streetlights, he thought about the sacrifices his mother had made, about the patience she had shown in the face of every hardship, and a quiet resolve settled in his heart. He knew the path ahead would be long, uncertain, and sometimes lonely. He knew there would be moments that would test every ounce of his courage and humility. But he also understood, in a way that only someone who has stared at the stars and dreamed of touching them could, that resilience is born from hope, and hope is strengthened by the love and respect we carry for those who believe in us, even when the world does not. Little did Sundar know. This was only the beginning, a journey that would take him far from the small streets of Chennai, beyond the familiar voices of family, into a world of unimaginable opportunity and intense challenge, where his character, his patience, and his kindness would be tested in ways he could never have imagined. And somewhere in the shadows of that journey, an event was approaching that would bring his mother, Lakshmi Pichai, into the light of a moment so powerful that the tears of her son would not just reflect personal triumph, but the pride of an entire nation. The night he returned home from the fair, Sundar opened the door to the quiet house and found his mother sitting by the window, her eyes reflecting the same stars he had watched as a boy. She smiled at him, but there was a tension he had never noticed before, a silent worry hidden beneath her calm exterior. He did not know it yet, but the next challenge, the one that would test the very essence of who he was just beginning to unfold, and it would demand from him not only intellect and courage, but a heart open enough to embrace both failure and unexpected honor. And as he sat beside her, the air thick with unspoken fears and dreams, Sundar felt something he could not yet name, a sense that life was about to change in ways that would bring joy and sorrow, hope and doubt all at once. He did not know it then, but the moment that would define not only his journey but also the pride of his country was quietly approaching, waiting to reveal itself in the most unexpected way. The winds of change as Sundar grew older. The small streets of Chennai began to feel like both a comfort and a cage. He had learned the language of machines, the poetry of numbers, and the quiet art of patience from his parents, but the world outside beckoned with a force he could no longer ignore. Each evening, as he walked past crowded markets and dusty alleyways, he imagined faraway places, cities glowing with lights he had never seen, and offices filled with people who thought about problems the way he did. He dreamed not of wealth or fame, but of creating something that could touch the lives of millions. Something that could make the world a little easier, a little brighter, a little more connected. Yet the path to that world was tangled with obstacles, many invisible to those around him. His family loved him deeply, but their understanding of the global stage was limited. They could see his talent, but not the scale of his ambition, and Sundar knew he would have to leave to risk the comfort of familiarity if he ever wanted to touch the life he imagined. College was a turning point. The campus was alive with energy, full of debates, competitions, and brilliant minds from across India. Sundar felt simultaneously exhilarated and overwhelmed. He was surrounded by students whose confidence sometimes bordered on arrogance, who could speak eloquently and move crowds with ease while he spoke quietly, often doubting if his words carried weight. Yet as the semesters passed, he began to realize that strength was not in the loudest voice, but in the clarity of thought, in the patience to listen, in the courage to try, even when the world was indifferent. He poured himself into his studies, into projects that others dismissed as too small or too difficult, and in that quiet labor, he began to stand out. Professors took notice, peers sought his guidance, and slowly, the boy from Chennai began to leave ripples in a pond far larger than his home. It was during this time that he first truly understood the power of kindness. One winter evening, a classmate struggling with a complex coding problem sat in despair at the edge of the lab. Sundar, who had been buried in his own work, noticed, the tears glistening in her eyes. He could have ignored her, focused on his own projects, but something in him stirred. He spent hours helping her understand, patiently explaining the concepts she could not grasp. It was tedious, frustrating, and yet profoundly rewarding. She eventually succeeded, and her gratitude was quiet, almost shy. But Sundar realized in that moment that true achievement was never only personal. It was shared, nurtured in others, amplified in ways one could never predict. This lesson would become the invisible thread connecting him to the moments of honor, pride, and humility that awaited in his future. As graduation approached, the pressure intensified. Sundar had done well, but the path to the world stage required more than intellect. It required opportunity, courage, and the willingness to step into uncertainty. He applied to universities abroad, sending essays that reflected not only his technical skill, but his quiet, reflective nature. Weeks turned into months, and each letter of acceptance or rejection carried a weight that seemed to press on his chest. He learned patience in a new way, the kind born not of repetition, but of enduring hope and silent anxiety. Then, a letter arrived that would change everything. An acceptance from a university in the United States, one of the most prestigious institutions for technology and innovation. Sundar felt a surge of joy, quickly tempered by the pang of leaving home, of leaving his mother, Lakshmi, whose gentle guidance had shaped every step of his life. The night before his departure, Sundar sat in the small living room of their home. His father was quietly repairing a tool as he always did, and his mother watched him with a mixture of pride and fear. She did not speak much, but her eyes said everything: fear of the unknown, hope for what could come, and a love so deep it seemed to envelop Sundar like a warm, invisible cloak. He wanted to say goodbye in words that could capture everything he felt, but language faltered. Instead, he simply held her hand, feeling the strength she had instilled in him, the patience that had tempered his ambition, the kindness that had shaped his character. As he lay in bed that night, bags packed, heart racing, he realized that leaving home was not just a physical journey but an emotional one, a crossing of thresholds that would test every lesson he had learned. The United States was unlike anything Sundar had imagined. The city hummed with possibility, the streets crowded with people whose lives moved at a speed he had never experienced. Classes were intense, competition fierce, and every day brought moments of doubt. Moments when he wondered if he truly belonged. Yet he persisted, finding mentors who saw his potential, colleagues who valued his insight, and a rhythm in the chaos that allowed him to flourish. The more he learned, the more he realized how vast the world was, how much remained to be explored, and how fragile success could be without resilience and humility. Years passed, and Sundar's work began to attract attention. He moved from one position to another, each time taking on challenges that seemed too large, too complex, too risky. Yet he approached every problem with the same quiet determination that had marked his childhood. Patience, curiosity, respect for others, and a refusal to be disheartened by failure. He discovered that leadership was not about authority, but about empathy, about listening, about empowering others to see their own potential. He learned that mistakes were inevitable, and that the true measure of character was how one responded to them. Each success was tempered with humility, each recognition with a renewed sense of responsibility. And yet, despite the growing recognition and the widening influence, Sundar never forgot home. He wrote letters, visited when possible, and carried his mother's lessons in every decision, every meeting, every challenge. He knew that the journey was not solely about personal achievement, but about honoring those who had nurtured him, whose sacrifices had made his dreams possible. It was during one of these moments of reflection, as he thought of his mother quietly tending to her small garden in Chennai, that he received news that would mark the beginning of an unforgettable chapter. A call from India informing him that Lakshmi Pichai was to be publicly honored for her lifetime of contribution, a recognition that would shine a light on the quiet strength behind her son's success. Sundar's heart leapt, yet it was tangled with nerves he had not anticipated. The honor was not his, and yet it was intimately connected to him, to the choices he had made, to the life he had built. He imagined his mother sitting in the spotlight, dignified, composed, yet carrying decades of quiet sacrifice. He imagined the moment when her eyes met his, the unspoken understanding that this recognition was not just a ceremony, but an acknowledgement of a life lived with humility, kindness, and resilience. And as he boarded the plane to return to India, Sundar felt a mixture of anticipation and fear, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. He could not yet know the depth of emotion that awaited, the tears that would flow, the pride that would swell in the hearts of millions who would witness this moment. He only knew that life had led him to this point, that the lessons of patience, respect, and quiet courage were about to collide with the world in a way that neither he nor anyone else could have predicted. And in the quiet moments before landing, as the clouds passed beneath the plane and the sun began to rise over the horizon, Sundar could not shake the feeling that this moment was not just about honor, but about destiny, a destiny that would not only define his mother's legacy but reveal the true measure of a man who had learned, since childhood, that greatness is silent, humble, and deeply human. But little did he know, the event that awaited him would challenge, more than his patience or humility. It would challenge his heart, his understanding of pride, and the very way he saw his country. It would bring joy and fear, tears and triumph, all entwined in a single unforgettable evening. The honor and the tears, the day dawned in Delhi with a sky so clear it felt like it had been painted for this very moment. Sundar Pichai stood quietly, in a corner of the grand hall, his suit neat, his hands folded, his mind racing with thoughts he could barely contain. The hall was enormous, filled with dignitaries, journalists, and families whose lives had been touched by countless stories of courage and perseverance. Yet for Sundar, the world outside seemed to blur, all noise fading into a singular focus. His mother, Lakshmi Pichai, poised to be honored by the Prime Minister of India, Modi ji. He remembered every sacrifice she had made, every quiet hour she had spent nurturing his curiosity, every moment she had hidden her own dreams so that his could flourish. Now the world would see what he had always known, the unwavering strength, the humility, and the grace of a woman whose life had quietly shaped one of the most influential minds of their time. As the ceremony began, Sundar's heart pounded, like a drum in his chest. Cameras flashed, officials whispered, and a hush fell over the crowd as Modi ji stepped forward, his presence commanding yet gentle. The Prime Minister spoke of service, of contribution, of lives that often go unnoticed, yet are the backbone of society. Sundar felt a lump in his throat as each word resonated with the life his mother had led. She had worked tirelessly, not for recognition, not for applause, but out of love, for her family, for her community, for the principles she held dear. Sundar could see her hands trembling slightly as she stepped forward, the weight of the moment, pressing down like 1,000 invisible hands. He wanted to run to her, to hold her hand, to tell her that he knew, that he had always known, how extraordinary she was. But he stayed rooted, knowing that some moments must be witnessed with quiet respect, not interrupted by emotion, no matter how overwhelming. The Prime Minister pinned the medal to her chest, and the audience erupted in polite applause. Yet for Sundar, the sound was distant, almost unreal. He watched as his mother's eyes glistened with tears she refused to let fall, her lips pressed together in a smile that contained decades of unspoken struggle. It was then, in the quiet intimacy of that moment, that Sundar felt something he had not anticipated, the flood of memories, the tiny, almost invisible moments of her life that had built the foundation for his own journey. He remembered her standing by the window, patiently guiding him through impossible sums and intricate calculations. He remembered her comforting him after failures, never with judgment, only understanding. He remembered her sacrifices, the nights she stayed awake while he slept, the meals she skipped to ensure he had enough, the dreams she set aside so he could chase his own. And then, despite his effort to stay composed, the tears came. They fell silently at first, tracing lines down his cheeks, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and awe. He could feel the weight of his emotions pressing against his chest, a pressure he had carried for years without realizing it. The crowd around, Hymn continued to clap. Photographers continued to snap. But for Sundar, time slowed, stretching the moment into eternity. He could not hold back a sob, a deep, unfiltered expression of love and pride, the kind that can only come from witnessing the triumph of someone who gave everything without asking for anything in return. And then, something unexpected happened. As Sundar tried to steady himself, a young journalist approached, camera rolling, asking for a few words. The room seemed to hold its breath. Sundar straightened, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and spoke with a quiet intensity that drew everyone's attention. He spoke not of himself, not of fame or achievement, but of his mother, the sacrifices, the lessons, the unyielding kindness that had shaped his life. His voice trembled, yet every word carried weight, resonating with a truth that transcended ceremony. The journalist nodded, moved, and as Sundar concluded, a wave of applause swept through the room, not just for the award, but for the story of love, resilience, and humility that lay behind it. Yet even in this moment of triumph, a shadow of doubt lingered in Sundar's mind. He knew that recognition, however grand, could never fully capture the essence of what his mother represented. He feared that the world might see only the surface, the medal, the ceremony, the applause, and miss the years of silent endurance, the nights of worry, the quiet courage that truly defined Lakshmi Pichai. This thought made his chest tighten, the celebration tinged with a bittersweet ache. He wanted the world to understand, not just to admire, but to see the humanity, the perseverance, the profound quiet strength behind every achievement. After the ceremony, Sundar guided his mother through the throng of well-wishers, each handshake, each smile, each photograph reinforcing the reality of the moment. Yet as he watched her, he noticed a subtle exhaustion, a quiet surrender to the magnitude of what had just occurred. He gently took her hand, whispered words of love and gratitude that only she could hear, and felt the depth of their bond crystallize in a single heartbeat. In that moment, he realized that pride was not just in the recognition, but in the journey, in the quiet, relentless pursuit of integrity, kindness, and resilience that had brought them to this day. And then, just as they thought the day could not grow more intense, a sudden commotion erupted near the stage. A miscommunication with the media, a misplaced camera, something small yet chaotic, and suddenly the perfect ceremony teetered on the edge of disorder. Sundar felt a surge of protectiveness, not for himself, but for his mother, for the dignity of her moment, for the grace that had always defined her. He moved quickly, calmly, guiding people, offering reassurances, his voice steady even as his heart raced. In doing so, he realized that life would always present challenges, even in moments of triumph, and that true composure was born from love, respect, and an unwavering focus on what truly mattered. As the evening drew to a close and the lights dimmed, Sundar stood outside the hall with Lakshmi, the cool night air wrapping around them. The city stretched endlessly, lights twinkling, like the stars he had once traced from his window as a boy. He felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration, pride and vulnerability, the tears he had shed, the gratitude he had expressed, the quiet understanding that life's greatest honors often come wrapped in emotion and challenge. All of it coalesced into a moment he knew he would carry forever. Yet even in this perfect, poignant scene, a subtle unease lingered. Sundar sensed that the world beyond this day held unforeseen trials, that the challenges he had faced, however profound, were only the beginning. And as he looked at his mother, who smiled softly, almost unknowingly, he felt the weight of an unspoken truth. Life's greatest stories are never finished in a single day, and the next chapter, full of surprises, triumphs, and heartbreaks, was already on its way. The night ended with a quiet promise between mother and son, a recognition that while medals fade and ceremonies conclude, the lessons of love, humility, and resilience endure. Yet Sundar could not shake the feeling that destiny had more in store, something beyond honor, something that would test not just his intellect or patience, but the very heart he had been shaping since childhood. As they drove through the streets of Delhi, the city lights reflected in his eyes. He knew deep down that the journey had only just begun, and that the next turn would be both unimaginable and unforgettable. The weight of the world. After the ceremony, Sundar returned to his work with a sense of renewed purpose, yet an invisible weight settled on his shoulders. The world had seen his mother's honor, had witnessed the strength that had shaped him, and yet the expectations, both external and internal, had grown exponentially. His colleagues celebrated quietly, respecting the bond he shared with his mother, but Sundar could not escape the pressure that had always accompanied recognition. It was not vanity he felt, but responsibility. The deep unspoken knowledge that every decision, every action, every word he spoke could ripple far beyond the walls of his office, touching lives in ways he could not always predict. His days became a delicate balance between innovation and caution. Projects that once excited him now carried enormous weight. A new product launch could change the lives of millions, yet failure could cast shadows on the people who trusted him, including the memory of sacrifices his mother had made for his success. Sundar's mind constantly analyzed, calculated, and imagined every possible outcome. He realized that leadership was not a title, but a responsibility so profound it could feel suffocating. He carried the hopes of his team, the faith of his mentors, and the legacy of his family with every decision. And yet, even in this pressure, he found clarity. He understood that resilience was not about avoiding stress, but about facing it with honesty, humility, and the quiet knowledge that mistakes are part of growth. But life, as it often does, soon presented a challenge he could not anticipate. One afternoon, during a critical product meeting, a technical flaw was discovered in a project months in the making. It was subtle, almost invisible, but the implications were immense. Investors would question confidence, users could face inconvenience, and the media would scrutinize every detail. Sundar felt a cold knot of fear tighten in his chest. He knew that how he responded would define not just the success of the project, but the culture of trust and integrity within his team. He called an emergency meeting, gathering his closest colleagues, and spoke with calm authority, acknowledging the problem openly while offering a clear, thoughtful plan for resolution. The room was tense, some faces betraying panic, others uncertainty, but Sundar's composure slowly anchored them. In that moment, he realized a truth he had carried since childhood. Leadership is measured not in moments of comfort, but in crises, when patience, clarity, and empathy must guide every choice. Amid these professional pressures, Sundar's personal life demanded attention as well. He found himself reflecting on the countless hours he had spent away from home, the moments he had missed with family, the conversations that had been postponed indefinitely. Lakshmi, though proud of her son, often worried about the toll of stress on his health, on his spirit. Sundar felt a surge of guilt. He had chased success to honor his mother, yet in doing so, he sometimes neglected the very relationship that had fueled his journey. He began to write her letters, long, reflective accounts of his days, his thoughts, his fears, and his hopes. Though they were separated by thousands of miles, these letters became a bridge, a reminder of the love, patience, and understanding that had always been his anchor. And yet, even as he poured himself into work and family, Sundar felt the stirrings of something more profound. The recognition of his mother had stirred something deep within him, a desire not just to succeed, but to make a tangible difference in the lives of ordinary people. He began initiatives aimed at improving access to technology, education, and opportunity, quietly funding programs, mentoring young innovators, and speaking at events that celebrated potential over fame. These efforts were unseen by most, yet they gave Sundar a sense of fulfillment he could not achieve through professional milestones alone. He realized that true success is not measured in titles or awards, but in the impact one leaves on others, often invisible, often uncelebrated, yet deeply enduring. But life, as it often does, carries both light and shadow. One evening, Sundar received a message from a former mentor, hinting at internal tensions within the company's leadership. Disagreements over the direction of projects, conflicting priorities, and subtle rivalries threatened the harmony he had worked so hard to cultivate. Sundar felt a familiar ache of uncertainty. He knew that navigating this terrain required more than intelligence. It required patience, diplomacy, and the courage to confront difficult truths without losing sight of kindness and respect. He spent sleepless nights reflecting on strategies, balancing ambition with humility, and preparing for conversations that could shape not just his career, but the future of the entire organization.